morning. It is Monday, November 14th, 2022, and this is DC Signal to Noise. Since we last talked, the U.S. midterms delivered what many are calling surprising results, to say the least. Global climate leaders gathered in Egypt. The grain markets, led by the corn market, slipped to a lower trading range. Winter showed up, and the college basketball season started. I am AgriTalk host Chip Flory. Welcome to Signal to Noise. Jim Wiesemeyer, Pro Farmer Policy Analyst. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning, Chip.
Okay, we are going to spend a lot of the time this morning on the midterm elections. There's just a couple of things that I want to get to from last week that I think are important before we dive right into it. Also, if you would like to be part of the conversation, there is a comments tab on the screen. Go ahead and click on that. A dialog box will pop up somewhere on the page for you, and you can type in your question, your comment, and we will definitely try to get to those before the end of the show. I want to talk a little bit about the inflation concerns and so on first, Jim, because the University of Michigan's sentiment index certainly didn't suggest that businesses are comfortable in the current economic environment, did it?
No, and that's what the Fed is worried about with
Yeah.
inflation becoming entrenched, Chip. You can see it in the earnings calls by more than a few companies.
Okay. The Fed governors, a very vocal group. I mean, there's times where I'm thinking to myself, I wish they'd just keep their mouth shut. But there are other times that I'm grateful that they are making their opinions known on a regular basis, and most of them are. But they're kind of indicating that they may not completely understand how these futures markets work. That the futures market is going to be out in front of what is happening today.
Yes. And you're seeing it in the equities market too. And you're seeing it in some, but not a lot, some commodities and other products like coffee hitting a real downdraft, Chip. So we're
Cotton.
beginning to see indications. Cotton, yeah, we're beginning to see indications. But it has definitely gotten into the U.S. housing sector, and the Fed knows that it is crimping the housing construction and housing sales, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a strong indicator for us all to watch. Global food input costs nearing $2 trillion. Okay, yeah, but how much of an increase is that? It's about a 10% increase over a year ago, Jim. And these countries that are importing food, and a majority of their food, a 10% increase in costs is devastating.
Huge, and with the impact of the dollar if they price them in dollars. So
Yeah.
it's big. And then even domestically in the U.S., as I said on AgriTalk, I attended and spoke at the American Ag Bankers Association meeting. And while they think generally the ag sector in the U.S. will be okay for 2023, they're nervous about 2024. Now I know we've heard similar scenarios over the past several years, but this time it's where interest rates are, because we've had relatively zero interest rates for the prior years. Now, if the Fed funds rates go to 5%, that equates to about a 10.5 to 11% operating loan rate, and that's crunch time.
Oh, absolutely. After we got the CPI data last week, we started to see we saw a big rally in the equities. We
Yes.
saw in one day the rate on the 10-year note backed off by 25 basis points.
Yes.
These are huge moves.
Yeah.
Huge moves. And the markets looked at the data that was out last week and basically decided, listen, we're close enough now that we can start to anticipate an easing in monetary policy at some point in the near future.
Yeah, well, at least lower rates for December at the FOMC meeting from prior
A
just a few
slower
weeks ago.
increase, a
A
slower
slower
increase.
increase.
Yeah,
Prior, it was thought 75 basis point increase. Now, the wide consensus is 50 basis points. Now, that's still higher, but
yeah,
again, I think it gave us a sugar high, if nothing else, on
yeah.
on Thursday in the equities market.
Okay. Of course, we had the midterm elections next week. We're going to spend the second half of the show on that, okay, Jim?
Sure.
Or more, or more. um, but over the anything else from last week that you really feel like we need to
Well,
feature?
Russia came out and then went back into this UN agreement. So it looks like they continue to discuss, but it looks like that'll be ongoing with or without Russia, by the way,
Right.
prior to the November 19th deadline.
Okay. All right. Uh, I'm going to call this over the weekend, even though it happened very early this morning, U.S. time. Biden and President Xi have already met in front of the G20 summit. This was it the first meeting between
First,
face to face
first face
meeting?
to face, absolutely, and
Okay.
that's always good because, Biden has said he wants to identify, and it's in his words, red lines with China. Like, what are the most sensitive issues, and I think that's the right approach. For those two leaders to discuss. So, anytime the world's two economic leaders talk, I like it.
Okay. Any indication of what the conversation sounded like at this point? I mean, are they happy with with what the state of relations are?
Well, I don't think it's any worse, and it's somewhat better than it was prior to the elections, by the way. There's no deliverables, as we call it in Washington, but I do think Xi Jinping, China's leader, is coming back into the world, and his government is having continued signals that they're modifying their zero COVID. And over the weekend, I think yesterday, Sunday, they announced some stimulus plans or gimmies for the residential real estate sector. So he's starting to move, and he's starting to meet with other leaders of the world. And again, that's a good sign.
Okay. On the COVID-19, when there was speculation last week that there was going to be a relaxation of the zero COVID policies in China, that gave US stocks a boost, Jim.
Yes. Yeah, well, because of such a significance that China plays in the logistics market,
Yeah.
in the supply and demand of very important products, etc. And albeit they had a major increase in COVID cases,
Yeah.
Jeff, over the weekend, and but still they're giving more than a few signals that they're going to modify their plan.
Okay.
Primarily not looking for secondary sources. So, that's a step.
Right. Okay. The other thing that happened in the markets last week that we have not mentioned yet in reaction to everything that took place was the dollar really just got hammered. Uh, uh, and that is something that grain traders have been looking for, trying to say that if we could get the dollar index into that 108 range, maybe we could see some export demand start to come back. Well, we got there. I don't know if we're seeing a whole lot of export demand come back or not, but what do you make of the currency trade? What's it mean for us?
Well, one for the any positive impacts on ag market trade, it takes at least 3, if not 6 months, for any continued trend in the dollar to
Mhm.
have an impact, Chip. Two is that the dollar really goes on the charts, yeah, where the downside and upside potential as opposed to a trading range. So we would have to go down uh, a bit more to really change the psychology of a bullish dollar.
Okay. As long as we're talking about currencies here, I'll go to Gary's question. I don't have an answer for this because I don't know if I completely understand exactly where you're coming from, Gary. Odds that Biden uses a cryptocurrency price hike.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure either. I
Okay,
will
give us a
tell you.
little more on that, Gary.
Yeah, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen now says it needs to be regulated, and that was evident now for quite some time. I mean, I dabbled a year or so ago in the crypto just to learn it, Chip, in a minor way, and it just opened my eyes that this was like the Wild West. Oh my goodness! While it helped me build reform
Oh,
my
the
kitchen.
NFT crypto debacle.
Okay,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. This uh the whole thing I always joked around. I always joked around, Jim, that the value of Bitcoin, Dogecoin, the cryptos is completely 100% determined by what the next person that wants to buy it thinks that thing is worth.
yeah.
Okay. And you know what? That's basically right. That's basically right. It's not like we are assigning any intrinsic value
Yeah.
to the crypto. It just continues to build on that transaction. And as the transactions continued to build higher and everything is 100% fully documented on the blockchain, as long as it continues to point to higher prices, the price will be higher
Yeah.
until it's not.
Yeah.
And once it's not, then to use an old phrase, then we find out that maybe the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah, it's like I said, it continues to be the Wild West, and it's
Yeah.
very an emotional trading, the
Yeah.
Bitcoin on attitudes and things like that. Now I know more than a few younger people like Bitcoin, et cetera, because they just don't like the stock market. They think that
Yep.
that's an old game and they don't want to play it.
Right. Right. It's it's what is happening in. I mean, nobody likes an "I told you so." Okay, nobody likes that. But there are a lot of, as you might have just said, Jim, experienced traders in equities and in currencies and in commodities that looked at what was happening with the cryptos and basically were saying don't trade that.
Yeah,
You
accident
can't
waiting to
trade that.
happen. And a lot of people got burnt on this one.
Yeah.
And Gary
And
Gensler,
now they're out of
any
money.
yes, Gary Gensler, SEC,
Yep.
for months, if not years, questioned this. It should have been regulated, at least in the US. And I don't
Okay.
usually like to add regulations, by the way, but
Right.
I did enough in the trading early on that I handed it to a couple young Chinese friends I know in DC, and I was amazed at what they did, rhythms of the market, etc. And
Yeah.
I would have had to just sit on that trade just 24/7, Chip, and I wanted
Yep.
no part of it. No part of it.
Right. Right. Okay, back to the G20, Jim, if we could, because uh, Russian President Vladimir Putin is not going to be there. He will be there virtually, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, now there's all sorts of rumors, and I don't want to get too involved in this one, Chip, of some internal things maybe going on in Russia, et cetera. And Putin started to change his position somewhat relative to Ukraine. So something may be going on in Russia relative to their invasion on February 24th. And you had Ukraine's leader now signaling at least let's have some peace talks. So I think
Okay.
we've got a turn of turn of psychology on this invasion now, and that's again
Okay.
that's a good thing.
Okay. All right. Uh, let's get to the midterms because the Senate is at least a 50-50 split. If Warnock beats Walker in the December 6th runoff in
December 6th.
Georgia, yeah, December 6th, it's going to be a 51-49
And that's
in the
important, Chip,
Senate. It
because
is.
right now with a 50-50, you have a split in the Senate on committee members. So if you get 51 on the Democratic side,
Yeah.
that means they control all the committees, and I'm telling you that's important.
Oh, absolutely. And are you handicapping the Walker race at this point?
Well, the history shows, just me, but everything's changed relative to the midterms that I have to think through. But you start all over. I've had a number of emails. The voting starts all over.
Yeah.
They don't take what's already been voted.
Right.
So it depends on turnout, and the Democrats, at least in recent history, Chip, have an advantage there to bring their people to the polls. So I would say Warnock, based on these humbled polls again, should have an early advantage in the polls. But we're going to see.
And yes, we will see. And we will see how much Georgia voters enjoy being in this position.
Yeah, and how much money is going to be spent. I mean, there's some reports that they're going to plow another $100 million into this runoff race. It's just mind-boggling. But we're going to see how the signal to at least Republican-leaning voters in Georgia get any lessons from what has occurred in the midterms, both relative to the Senate and
Yeah.
also the very interesting House races, Chip.
Yes, absolutely. Now, I've I had a few conversations over the weekend about the midterms, and the consensus was the Georgian voters are going to go with Walker now to keep the Senate in complete gridlock.
Hmm. Uh, that's probably best for the Republicans because of that committee leadership
Yep.
change. So we're gonna, we'll just have to see it unfold because
Okay.
the Democrats won't have now the advantage that they've had over the last several elections. I think we saw this when Trump lost. The Republicans are going to have to learn how to play the mail vote game, because the Democrats have about a 30-day to 50-day advantage here by emphasizing mail-in votes, provisional votes, etc. And
Yeah.
that was evident, Chip, in the House contest. I know Trump is being blamed, rightfully so, for a number of both Senate and House losses, but I think a big one was was these mail votes,
Yeah.
mail-in.
Yeah. I've seen some analysis on the news programs about how the COVID style voting practices were continued into the 22 elections and did have similar impacts on the outcomes that they may have had in 2020. And I think that is I think it yeah, I hear a lot of uh you know the the calls of all or nothing now. And what I mean by that is people that want 100% day of voting only.
Yes.
Day of voting only.
Well, that's up to the state level, say, and that's where some of the contests, such as in Arizona and Nevada, for those areas in the state that would be over the governors and other elected officials, uh, could change election voting timelines. But in many cases, the Democrats won those positions, so I wouldn't expect many changes in that regard. That's why the Republicans are going to have to strategize to emphasize mail-in votes.
Mhm.
Plus it's a way to get your voters to actually vote for your party rather than to concentrate so much on election day. We need election month now because that's the way the Democrats do it, and they have learned to play that game quite well. And
Yeah.
on election day, it depends on your attitude of going to the election booth, the weather in some cases, believe it or not, and what the psyche is for that particular time frame. So
Right.
I think that was one of the biggest reasons why we saw the tight races. But there were also reasons that Supreme Court abortion case was far more important and sustainable as a Democratic advantage issue because the after election polls show it. and two, the relatively weaker candidates on the Republican side in not just House and Senate races, but also in the governor races, and that's why many Republicans, are pointing the finger at Trump.
Okay, as long as long as we're doing that and pointing some fingers or talking about people pointing fingers, talk to me about the Jan 6 hearings.
That also had an impact more. A lot of
Mm-mm,
Republicans, I know in my emails and talks, said, "Oh, that was being overplayed, etc." But
mm-mm.
the polls show no, that had sustained impact, and you primarily saw that, Chip, I think, in the independents. I've said for years, the independent voters, yeah, there's not that many, 12 to 15%, but they become important. And at least based on election day polls, they favored the Democrats by 2 points when most of the prognosticators thought that they would lean toward the Republicans. So, and also, I think one of the reasons why some of these polls, not all, but most, were inaccurate, signaling even a possible Republican wave, was that they overweighted the Republicans, because for the prior several years they underweighted the Republican vote. So they
Yeah.
just got caught into that. So there's a host of reasons, Jeff. But that January 6th incident, in which President Trump sat in his office and watched it on TV rather than to make some moves, that hurt.
Yeah. The farmer forum that we had on AgriTalk on Wednesday last week, Tim Burrock was on there. You know Tim.
Yes.
And Michelle Jones from Montana. Two two different viewpoints came to the same conclusion, and that was that the Trump affiliation worked against you because it's not that voters don't like the Trump policies, they just don't have the stomach for the controversy going forward.
No longer. Yes, they've had enough. They've had enough. Yeah.
Right.
Gary points out ballot harvesting is hard in rural areas. I don't think the Republicans' issues are in the rural areas. In fact, had it not been for the rural votes in both the Senate and the House amongst rural voters, the Republicans would even be in worse shape. You have to get into these suburban areas that can be winnable. But also look at the states that, like Florida and Texas, whose Republican candidates, governors, senators, etc., ran quite well. They were not beholden to Trump. And they
Right.
also had a plan that they told the voters what they wanted to do. And more than a few voters said, the Republicans were excellent in targeting the downturns, the negatives of the Democratic Party, but they didn't offer enough of how they would resolve it. And
Right.
I think you're going to see that come up in the years ahead, especially the 2024 races for both the Senate and, of course, the House, but for president. That you just can't
Yeah.
complain, because let's get bottom line. Look at all the things that we said before the election, the top issues: the economy, inflation, the open border, the crime, etc. And then you had our president taken apparently the right approach of saying this should be a choice election rather than a referendum. Now, I
Mhm.
don't know who told him or whether it was him, but that was the right strategy, whether you agree with it or not.
Right. Right.
So we saw some major eye opening developments.
Okay, I'll just throw this out there from Grassroot 011. We're not going to get into a whole lot of this, but Trump did offer up the National Guard, okay, on January 6th.
Yes.
And they were told to stand down. So We have to remember that. We have to remember that. And what Grassroots is saying here is don't blame Trump. Okay.
I think that's part of the reason, because let me just cite, uh, you have his former vice president, okay, coming
Hmm.
out with a book tomorrow in which it's not rosy regarding his leader at the time, President Trump, Pence, Vice President Pence.
Right.
So I don't think the primary blame is Trump. I think we've already discussed the reasons why,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
but he certainly had a role in it.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, some additional analysis that I've seen is issue denial, where parties don't believe, even if there is a problem that has taken place. I'm talking about inflation. I'm talking about the border. I'm talking about crime. Even though those issues are well documented, if a member of the party denies or does not believe that their party is responsible for inflation, the border issues, crime, that then it has no influence on their decisions at the polls.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, they're more likely to vote with their party, even if those are their top issues, if they don't believe that their party is to blame for those issues.
Well, look at Hochul, the governor of New York, who
Yeah,
won only by what, 5 percentage points around, uh, 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 where prior to her saying they're making up these crime statistics. I mean, that goes along with what you're saying. So we're just in uncharted reasons for the election results. But
yeah,
another person told me we used to vote the better candidate. Now we vote the party,
right,
and
right.
despite whatever information you want to throw out. And I think that helps explain some of the things that we saw.
Okay. Uh, we are a republic. I understand that. We're Democrat republic, Democratic republic. The concern was that democracy would die with this election. Jim, did democracy die with the election?
No, and it wouldn't have, no matter which
Right.
way it went. That was just a theme that Biden played. He
It was
just
effective.
didn't want to make it a referendum on his administration, and it looks like he succeeded.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, Jim, what's next?
Well, we're going to have leadership races once we determine who wins the House. And on the Republicans, on the Democratic side, Pelosi, the current House Speaker, over the weekend gave different signals. If the Democrats would suddenly keep control of the House, again, which is unlikely but close,
Mhm.
she gave the signal, that she could stick around. On the Republican side, it's going to be very interesting because Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, while he'll get the majority of the votes this week to become speaker if the Republicans, win the chamber, come January when you have to get the 218 votes, he doesn't have them today and he won't have them in January. So that means he has to deal with the arch conservatives, many of whom in his party are in the Freedom Caucus. And they're already giving him a list of changes, Chip. And I'll just tell you one that could affect the committee leadership in the House. The Freedom Caucus members want the committee members to vote on the chair of those panels rather than the leadership. So that's a significant change. Now they have some other ideas, but McCarthy, in order to get the House speakership, is going to have to give. Will it be too much? We're going to see. So I would
Hmm.
watch that in the months ahead.
Okay. Okay. Lawmakers do come back this week. What's going to be at the top of the agenda?
Oh, well, it's spending. It's the
Yeah.
fiscal year 2023 budget that started October 1. Will there be an omnibus bill? Probably so. What's attached to it? There could be both parties going after things that they want in a spirit of getting out of this town. The most emails I've received since the election, Chip, is whether or not the election results impact the prior expectations of an extension for the Emergency Relief Program
Okay, good.
(ERP) for eligible 2022 crops and livestock. In my calls to Congress over the weekend and today, signal that the odds are still I don't know high, but over 50% that they will get an extension to the ERP program. But we have other things as far as judicial nominations, some two ag sector related trade officials, nominations, which will be approved by wide marks. And the debate on the debt limit, either suspension or the increase, Chip, the Democrats want to suspend that this through the lame duck session and have it go through the 2024 presidential election. The Republicans want to use it as leverage, so this may be punted off until the new Congress next year. Those are the biggies, Chip, as far as I can see.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Hey, did you hear that it's time to get in line?
Far.
Well, Jeff Bezos says that he will give away most of his billions of dollars, 124 billion, during his lifetime. I need to get to know Jeff.
Yeah, well, Dolly Parton got 100 million, and she's very good at her aid programs,
absolutely.
And I know that's why he did that. I just hoped before he gives away too much that he either buys the Nationals team or the Commanders, because we need a lot of money and different leadership.
Very good. Very good. All right. Today on AgriTalk, we've got Machinery Pete. We're going to be talking about the economy with Vince Malanga. This afternoon, Scott Davis from Bullpen Trading. Have a great week, everybody. Keep watching for those signals.